warm welcome to all the participants today. This is our 10th webinar in our Ritambara Talk series. I'm seeing a lot of new names and faces here today. So we just want you to know that Ritambara is a wellness company that looks at wellness in a holistic way, not just the body, but the mind as well. And we do all this through the practice and knowledge and wisdom that comes from our ancient Indian scriptures and heritage. So our topics that we normally talk about are about delve into self-discovery, personal transformation, health, harmony, holistic well-being. And we also talk about the arts and tradition and that we have in India, which we do under the title of Essence of India. We believe that there's a strong connect between the arts and your inner self. So that's the reason why that's part of Ritambara. Today we have for you Acharya Raghu Ganapati ji, who will be talking on the subject Spirituality Decoded. And I think that's a subject that we all want to know a little bit more about. And you know, there's always this confusion, and a lot of people confuse spirituality and religion, but they're completely separate. And I think Acharya ji will tell us a lot more about it today. A little bit about him. Acharya Ganapati is a scholar, practitioner, and teacher of the Advaita, the non-dual Vedanta philosophy, of which he's going to talk some more today. And this comes from the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. He's learned his Veda mantras from Sringeri Shankara Math, and he has undergone intensive learnings on Vedanta and advanced Sanskrit from Arsha Vidya Gurukulam, which is in Coimbatore. He's also founded a not-for-profit organization in the name of Arsha Vignya Nidhi to preserve and propagate the rich legacy of the unique knowledge and practice of Advaita Vedanta left behind by his guru, Pujya Swami Dayanand Saraswati. So the program will follow this format. We have 40 to 45 minutes of Acharya ji talking to us. And then after that, we'll have a 15 minutes question and answer that he will moderate himself. You are all going to be muted during the talk, right through the talk. And please stay muted because we don't want any sounds coming through. We are recording this session. And feel free to post all your questions on the chat function that you see at the bottom of your screen. And Acharya Ganapati ji will go through them one by one. If you'd rather ask your question then, face to face with the Acharya ji, then please, what you can do is you can just wait for him to finish all the questions on the chat function, and then we'll give you an opportunity to unmute yourself and ask the question. So let's get on with the program today. And thank you so much for being here, Ganapati ji, and over to you.
Thank you, Binaji. Thank you very much. Om Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Asmad Gurubhyo Namaha. Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste all of you. At the outset, let me first thank Praveen ji, Veena ji, Prem ji, and in fact the entire team of Ritambara for having given me this opportunity to share my thoughts with you all on this subject of spirituality. As Binaji said, this word spirituality is often used but understood differently by different people. Therefore, I felt that there is a need to understand what is meant by spirituality from the perspective of our Shastras, our scriptures. Those who have gone through the article which was circulated will find it easier to follow the trend of my thought. And I must also let you know that I'm a traditional Vedanta practitioner. And my source of knowledge is the Shastras, which I have studied and which have been explained to me by my gurus, who belong to the lineage of gurus, beginning from Adi Guru Sadashiva, coming through Vedavyasa, Adi Shankara, and my own guru, Swami Dayanand Saraswati, and his disciples. So my approach is traditional. Therefore, I may use words like Shastra for ancient Indian scriptures, or Ishvara or Bhagavan for God. Of course, not that I have any problem in using the other one, but these come easily to me. So with those initial remarks, let us get into the topic. If there is one thing which every one of us want in our life, that is happiness. Happiness not occasionally, now and then. We want happiness always. We always are looking for unlimited happiness in everything that we seek and in everything that we do. And mind you, it is not just the human beings who are looking for this happiness. If you observe carefully, every living being in this world is constantly looking for happiness. If you observe a cow which is standing in a hot sun, and if it sees a shade of a tree a little far away, it will immediately move towards that shade. Now, why does it do that? Because the shade gives it more comfort than the hot sun. And it probably, I mean, the cow may not be able to tell us all these things. We have to make an intelligent guess. But it makes it happy in the shade of the tree as compared to the hot sun. So the point is that every living being is looking for happiness, and there is a very good reason why it is happening. But we will not go into the reasons today, because that is not the subject matter of spirituality decoder, right? And that is why if we analyze each and every action that we do, we will realize this fact that what we are looking for is happiness. For example, just look at it. Why do we go after material possessions? Why do we buy a house? Why do we earn money? Why do we buy a car? Why do we listen to music? In fact, why do we read a book? Why do we love the company of our friends and some relatives, not all of them? Why do we even go to a movie or a concert? And in fact, when it's hot, we also look for air-conditioned comfort. And when it is very cold, we look for a bonfire, the warmth of a bonfire. Why do we do all these things? And this is because each of these things gives us a sense of fulfillment, a sense of happiness. But the tragedy is, while we want enduring happiness or a limitless happiness, we don't realize the fact that all these things which I mentioned can give us only limited happiness. And that long-lasting happiness does not lie in these pursuits can be easily seen from three facts. The first one is, all the things that we pursue are limited by time and space. Now, a limited thing can only give us limited happiness and not unlimited happiness. So we are always barking up the wrong tree. The second point is, if happiness lies, or these things, these pursuits are the source of happiness, then they should continue to give us happiness as long as they exist, even though they are limited by time. But as long as they last, they should give us continuous happiness. But our experience is not that. What is a source of happiness today can become a source of misery for us sometime later. So that shows that they are not the source of happiness, which are, in fact, they are not the source of lasting happiness which we are looking for. And there is a third reason also. If these pursuits are the source of happiness, then they should be giving the same kind of happiness to everybody who are pursuing these things. But that doesn't happen. What gives me happiness may not give you happiness. I mean, for example, it's a little crude example. If I love a girl, I feel that by marrying her, I will become happy. Now, this marriage itself can cause unhappiness in somebody else who also want to marry that girl, isn't it? So if that marriage pursuit or that relationship is going to give happiness, then everybody should get the same happiness from that source. But that doesn't happen. So therefore, we have to come to the conclusion that all these pursuits which we are doing, searching for happiness, are not the source for happiness. And so our search continues. We keep on searching how I can be more happy, how I can be more happy. And mind you, this happiness in our Shastras is what is being mentioned as Moksha Purushartha. The fourth Purushartha, which is the Moksha Purushartha, talks about this enduring happiness only, this Ananda only. When we say Sachidananda, that Ananda is what is being talked about as enduring happiness. But I won't elaborate on that now, because let us move on with the thought. So when this is the situation, what happens? Somebody comes around and he tells us that you are actually looking at the wrong place for happiness. Spirituality will give you this enduring happiness. So we say, okay, let me add spirituality also to my list of seeking. So what you do, you start looking what is this spirituality. And actually they are not wrong. The only problem is, if we understand what spirituality is, then it will make sense that spirituality can give you endless or enduring happiness. And as I said, this word spirituality is used by a lot of people with varied connotations, and one can't be sure that all of them understand it in the same manner. It is like the story of the 5 blind men trying to figure out how an elephant looks like. I am sure that you all must have heard this story. I won't repeat the story here. So they are all blind, and whichever part they are touching, they think that is the shape of the elephant, right? Nobody has got the full idea of how an elephant looks like. So what we have to do, we have to decode this word spirituality, decipher what it practically means in our day-to-day life, how we can apply it to our attitudes, our behavior, and move towards that elusive goal which I talked about of enduring happiness. Starting from attaching a mystic element to it, some people feel that being very religious is being spiritual. There are others who feel that if they go to places of worship like temple or church and all that, they are being very spiritual. Yet others feel that spiritual means having a spiritual guru to guide. So if you have a guru, you are spiritual. And then some others feel that by listening to talks like this, by reading up the scriptures, shastras, they are spiritual. And yet others are there who look for happy hours to be in high spirits, and they consider themselves also to be spiritual in a different manner. In all this, when we talk of spirituality, we must be clear about one thing. it should be this unlimited happiness we are talking about should be something we should gain in this life while living. If after our death and all that somebody says you are going to get unlimited happiness, that's of no use to us. But unfortunately, what happens is we find some people also talking about spirituality, which has nothing to do with anything to be gained in this life. Their prescription for this enduring happiness is go to heaven after death and then enjoy bliss in communion with God. And there are different versions in all these religions for this trip to heaven spirituality. And according to me, they are merely belief systems, right? I mean, you can't know whether you are really going to be happy or not. And my Guru Swami Dayananda Saraswati says, if there is a solution after death, I don't call it a spiritual solution. That's a promised land, a promise to go for which you don't need to do anything. You need not change. All that you have got to do is have a belief, a non-verifiable belief, because nobody has come back from heaven and told you that all these things are happening in heaven, right? We should read it only in jokes. And it's a non-verifiable belief, and with that belief, we continue our life and die. And then later on, what happens, nobody knows, right? There is no spiritual pursuit in this world if it does not, here and now, when I am alive, resolve in a solution for my fundamental problem of continued search of happiness. In fact, he goes on to say, and I quote him again, spiritual means something, a topic which is dear to all and sundry, a topic that everyone is interested in, even though one doesn't know what it is. Once he knows, interest doesn't remain a choice. The more you know, the more you get interested in it. In fact, any other interest, he says, is a confused interest. So interest in this alone is reflecting upon interest in all other things. This is what Swamiji says. And we pursue all the other things which I mentioned because we have an illusion and a confusion about those things. A house, a car, a marriage, investments, insurance policies. We think that they will all give us better security and give us enduring happiness. But we have seen that those things do not give any better security to us. We just superimpose a value on our own on those things which they don't actually have. The stock market has proved this fact, that investments will give you security is gone. Along with that, the retirement plans of so many people have also gone. To some extent, my own, right? So what happens is, throughout our life, we keep on looking for these crutches, some external support for feeling secure and happy. But in the end analysis, we will find that it is the very same crutches we hold on to which give us the feeling of insecurity or are the cause for our unhappiness. So therefore, the first step in spirituality is to realize that I have a problem. Then understand that the problem is one of a basic confusion in my mind about myself and what I consider to be a source of happiness. And since the problem is centered on me, therefore the solution also should be centered in me alone. And the solution is to see that I am free from what I think I am. And this will require a change from what I take myself to be now. It will require a change in my way of living, my attitudes, my value structure, my behavior, how I look and interact with the world, everything, in fact, will require a change from what we are used to now. Then what happens? My whole life becomes a means to an end. And that is not separate from my life. It's not separate from me, because I am the means and I am the end for what I am seeking. So this is what I say is spiritual, which is the topic of Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual Vedanta. In fact, for your information, it is only the Advaita Vedanta philosophy which says that you can get moksha in this life itself. There are two types of mukti which is talked about in Advaita Vedanta: Jivan Mukti and Videha Mukti. All these things can require a lot of explanation what they mean, but it is only this one philosophy amongst all of the philosophies that says that you can become free, a Mukta Purusha in this life itself. So for that you have to change, and this change is not very easy to come about. I mean, we can talk about it endlessly, but it requires a conscious effort, a determination. In fact, the word used in Shastra is mumukshutvam. Mumukshutvam means a tivra icha, a very burning desire to become free from all the bondage of the samsara, and also free yourself from this cycle of rebirths. And there are about 8 habits. Of course, there are so many things that spiritual people do, but I have picked up about 8 habits of spiritual people, which I have observed, which I have learned, which I feel are the initial steps a person who is really serious about this seeking has to adopt, has to take on and set out on this beautiful journey of spirituality, provided he chooses to do so. It is your own choice. We have got all free will. Everybody need not necessarily become spiritual, right? So let us look at those things, in not in too much detail. The first habit of the spiritual people I have observed, and it is there, is bhakti. By bhakti, I do not mean that you go to a temple or you do puja every day and all that. No. By bhakti, I mean having a reverential attitude towards everything in this cosmos. Every living thing, every non-living thing in this cosmos. And we have in our religion a beautiful infrastructure which has been created for this purpose, for generating this reverential attitude. And we have to see that, understand that infrastructure and use that infrastructure. Now, it is very easy for us to develop a reverential attitude towards somebody whom we consider to be more powerful than us, isn't it? For example, we are invited to Rashtrapati Bhavan to meet the President of India. Oh, President of India is a very high, powerful, much more powerful than us. So when we go there, what will be our attitude when we meet the President? We will be very reverential towards him, isn't it? So the higher the power, the more reverence you will have towards that power. And it's not only the President. In fact, even a messenger in his office, we will be very reverential towards him because he is associated with a high power, right? So the starting point, what our system did was, they tried to start this process of gaining this reverential attitude through construction of temples. And in the temples, they put the gods. They said there is a God who is very powerful, much more higher than you. So when you go to the temple, automatically, and we have experienced this, isn't it? When we go to a temple, automatically there is a reverential attitude towards that altar, towards that idol which is there, which is generated in us. We don't need to actually work for it. Automatically it comes. Why? Because we know that there is God in the temple, and that God is much higher power, and so we must respect, we must have reverential attitude towards that. That's fine, easily understandable. But what about the other things in the cosmos, if you ask? First thing they did was, they made that idol of the god out of stone. Or later on, they used 5 metals, the Panchaloha they call. So the moment you make the idol out of stone, you develop a reverential attitude towards the stone also, because it represents God. I mean, a Shivalinga, if you see, we have a reverential attitude towards the Shivalinga. Why? Because we don't see it as a piece of stone. We see it as God incarnate. The God is there in the Shivalinga. So the first thing they said, and in fact, I'll go one step forward. They constructed the temple in stones. According to Agama Shastra, which regulates all this construction of temples, there are very specific types of stones which you have to use in doing various things in a temple. So the moment the temple is made of stones, stone is an inanimate thing, but we develop a reverential attitude towards that. Whenever we enter a temple, what do? Most of us, rather, we will touch the step of the temple and do like this, isn't it? Why do we do that? It is only a piece of stone on which you are going to step on it, but still you have a reverential attitude towards that. So this is the first stage where they develop this reverential attitude. So the inanimate things, which you can call it stones or whatever it is, they are all inanimate things. So you develop a reverential attitude towards all those things, because they are now associated with a higher power, which is Ishvara or Bhagavan or God or whatever you call. Then there are so many other things. For example, the 5 basic elements which Shastra talks about. And there are so many other things. What they did, they elevated everything to the status of God, the status of Devata. People don't understand this and then make fun of Hindu religion that you have got 33 crore Devatas and all that. It is not 33 crore Devatas, but we see God in everything that is there in this entire universe. That is what we have to understand. We don't see the form and name. We see what is behind the form and name. And that is our basis for our worship. So they elevated everything. So fire, they made it Agni Devata. Water, they made it Varuna Devata. Vayu Devata. Akasha Devata. So all these things, even Prithvi also, they made it Earth, the Prithvi Devata. So everything, when you elevate it to the status of a Devata, then automatically you will develop a reverential attitude towards all those things, right? In the next step, what they did, they said that all the pujas or the worship in the temple should be done with what? Flowers and leaves. When you use flowers and leaves to worship that superpower, God, automatically these flowers and leaves also become reverential, isn't it? So this is how they brought in one by one items. So all the flora, and that's why we have a tulsi plant. There is a bata vriksha, which is supposed to be very, auspicious, and people go around it and praying for children and all that. I mean, there are so many stories in Puranas about that. So through this methodology, they brought the reverential attitude for all the flora. Now, what about fauna? There are animals, dangerous animals, poisonous animals. What about them? They said, let us attach these animals to these gods. Let Ganesha have a rat attached to him. So when we see it as a rat, we may probably hate it. But when we see a rat as Ganesha's Vahana, we develop a reverential attitude towards that rat. Similarly, they put a snake around Shiva's neck, a poisonous snake. But when we see a snake, we have a Naga Panchami, also a festival for the snakes. So we have a reverential attitude towards snakes. And then they put Durga on a tiger, the most wild animal, rather, right? Otherwise, we will, even in zoo, when we see a tiger, we will be away from it. But they put Durga on a tiger, so that even a tiger must develop a reverential attitude. I can go on and on and on and give you so many examples how the whole infrastructure has been developed. So if we understand this whole infrastructure, everything in this cosmos, in fact, Navagraha, these nakshatras, stars, everything is covered in our Shastras. In terms of prayer, in terms of how we should develop a reverential attitude. So the first step in spirituality is to have this reverential attitude towards everything. Everything that you come across, including mosquitoes and cockroaches, rather, right? Because they are also created by God. They also have a life. Now we go to the next point, which is, I have mentioned the Saptanga Yoga. Now you will be wondering why Saptanga Yoga. I just left out Samadhi because Samadhi is an advanced level practice of yoga, Ashtanga Yoga. But these first 7 steps are very, very important in spiritual pursuit. Bhagavan Krishna talks about them in the 6th chapter of the Gita. But many of us say we are yoga practitioners and then we are in the spiritual path. All that they are doing is they are doing asanas and pranayamas. That is what they call yoga. Asanas and pranayamas, without the other angas of the yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, they are mere physical exercises and nothing more than that. They are not going to lead you anywhere into spirituality. And the most important aspect of this Ashtanga Yoga is the first 2, Yama and Niyama. Unless you understand and practice these Yama and Niyama disciplines, you are not into spirituality at all, irrespective of you may be doing yogasana for hours together and all that. So this is the second point which we have to follow if we want to be on the spiritual path. The third is Daya. Daya means what? Compassion. And this is closely linked to the next one, which is Dana. I'll come to that later. And mind you, it is not easy to be compassionate. One has to discover some bigness in oneself to be compassionate. If you are always comparing yourself with others, your limitations with others' limitations, you can never be compassionate. So that bigness should be centered on oneself. And I don't mean bigness in terms of your wealth or your money or in terms of the power that you wield, not in terms of any status that you enjoy or command in the society. No, that is not the bigness I am talking about. There is a fullness in you. You feel that I can be compassionate, I can actually help others, I can reach out to others who need that help. So that fullness has to come. And spiritual people I have found, including my own Guru, Swami Dayananda Saraswati, that fullness I have seen in him. So that's why it is easy for him to be compassionate, and that is why he was given the name Dayananda by Swami Chinmayananda, who was his Guru. Otherwise, if you don't understand this, compassion can be there, very nice word, but it's a word and a dream, that's all. You can be compassionate occasionally, like when we have this coronavirus or some earthquake is there or some flood is there, you can be compassionate. But that is more of empathy rather than compassion. And this is the beauty. Now, no human heart is denied of empathy. Empathy is there in all our hearts. We fail to discover that. And sometimes it shows up. For example, if we see a mentally challenged person on the road, do we actually despise him or have a hatred for him? No. If we are a Sanskrita Purusha, we will have empathy for him. We will feel sorry for his state of affairs, knowing that he has got a serious mentally challenged problem, right? So this compassion, this empathy is there, and this is the window through which we have to enter this realm of compassion. And this is very, very necessary for us. This Daya attitude is necessary for us to be in this spiritual pursuit, right? This does not mean that you have to be very compassionate towards all types of behaviors. You can be compassionate if you understand the background of a person, why he is behaving in a particular way, and you need not validate his behavior. See, Understanding one's background and validating are two different things, rather. You need not say it is right, but you understand and you feel sorry for him, like we feel sorry for so many people because of their own inability to behave in a proper manner. The next I have picked up is Dhanam. Now, Dhanam is roughly translated as charity, but it connotes much more than just giving. As one grows in life and becomes an adult, one needs to transform from being a consumer to a contributor. That's very, very important. The growth of a human being lies in his or in her capacity to contribute, to be a contributor. One cannot contribute unless one feels secure. If I feel that all the money that I am earning is required for my future, my children's future and grandchildren's future, I have that insecurity running through all my future generations, I will never be able to part with the money that I earn. So first thing is you have to feel secure that whatever I have is enough for me, more than enough for me. My children are not going to look up to me for giving them any kind of money. So I use that money to give as charity, as donation to all the needy people, all the people who can use that money better than my using it, putting in a bank deposit or investing in a loss-making mutual fund. So one needs to feel that I have enough, and this is extra for me. I will share it with others. So moving from being a consumer to a contributor is what Dhanam means. And there are very specific rules in our Shastras about how a Dhanam should be given. In fact, it should be secret. Nobody should know. Our Shastra says that the right hand which is giving should not, the left hand should not know the right hand which is giving. And you find these days people only when, even in coronavirus, I get a lot of photos, they will give one rice bag, take big photograph and put it on the WhatsApp and everywhere. Oh, I have done this, I have done. That is not Dhanam at all. That is only self-aggrandizement. You are trying to popularize yours. And it need not be money or anything. You can give Annadhanam. You can give Vidya Dhanam. You can teach a few people. You can pick up a child's future, entire education. Nobody needs to know about it. Even your spouse doesn't need to know about it. You can just do that, provided you feel that Dhanam attitude is there in your spiritual pursuit. Then another very important aspect is Maunam. Maunam means silence. And silence at the physical level, at the sensory level, and also at the mental level. It's very, very difficult to practice, I tell you, but it's a very important habit in the spiritual pursuit. It has to be started, practice. You have to start practicing it deliberately in the initial stages. It doesn't come naturally to us because we all have an urge to talk, isn't it? Whenever we meet somebody, we have this urge to talk and meet him, shake hands and do. Even when we are sitting with in a restaurant with a lot of people, you can see the sound level in the restaurant, how much it is. Everybody wants to keep on talking. So observing silence is a very, very difficult thing. So you have to do it very carefully. And many times this talking is accompanied by body language also. And that actually leads us to a lot of troubles also many times, In fact, this talking is both ways very difficult, The tongue God has gives us two problems. One is getting us into trouble through talking. Another is getting us into trouble through eating, rather. So we have a taste for the tongue, so we eat beyond our capacity. So this tongue you have to manage very, very carefully. And for that, the thing which my guru told me was, one day in the month, observe silence, total cut off from everything, your phone, your laptop, everything. In fact, he says, alone, without any family members, all alone, you go to a place, natural place, some place where it is safe, and spend your time in silence, just observing nature. Don't be judgmental about nature. Don't be judgmental about anything that you see. Just observe and absorb. That's all. Don't talk to anybody. No phone calls, nothing. This is a practice you start. After you have practiced it for quite good time, this will come automatically to you. So even in amidst lot of people, you can train yourself to be silent and be speak only when you are required to speak. So this is the sixth discipline. The seventh one is seva. Seva here means selfless service. What we are talking about is not again doing seva and then expecting something in return. It is selfless service. You can render it to a guru. You can render this seva to a community. Lot of people I know go to hospitals every day in the evening and they serve the patients there in the hospital. This attitude to reach out to others and give them some physical comfort is the physical seva. All these things I tell you are very, very necessary because these are the steps which help us to start diluting our ego. The moment you reach out to somebody, then your ego slowly comes down. We don't reach out because we feel, oh, why should I reach out? I am bigger than that guy. So again, this seva also instills in you an attitude of being a contributor, that somebody is suffering, I am contributing my might. I don't have anything to do. I don't have money, I don't have learning. You have got a physical body, use that to go and do seva. And all these things, when I spent 3.5 years in the Gurukulam, in the ashram of Swamiji, all these things we were made to do and we practiced all these things throughout those 3.5 years. So I'm not telling you something, some brilliant idea from somewhere. These are all things which I have myself gone through. Then the last one, not the last one, the second last one is Swatantrata. This is very important. Swatantrata means being independent. In short, throw away all the crutches which you are leaning upon for this happiness pursuit. Because those crutches are the ones which will give you trouble and which will prevent you from being happy, becoming enduringly happy. So throw away all those crutches now. In fact, many times we blame other people for our problems, right? First time somebody says there is a problem, oh, I know, that fellow is responsible for my problem, or this thing is responsible for my problem. The Swatantrata starts by owning up, I am responsible for my problems. That is very, very important. We have to understand. How do we do that? Now, what has happened is in our life, there were many luxuries, isn't it? Slowly, we turned all those luxuries into necessities. Now, in the spiritual pursuit, what you do, you reverse that process. All things that you consider as necessity, you convert them into luxury. And the moment you convert them into luxury in your mind, then whether you have it or you don't have it, it doesn't matter to you. As long as you are sticking to all your basic necessities, which in Hindi, roti, kapda, makan, what we can say, right? Food, shelter, and clothing. If you have got the basic necessity, that is what we require for our day-to-day living. Everything you consider as your luxury. In fact, you won't believe, in the ashram, we were given a 10 by 10 room for us to stay for 3.5 years with an attached bathroom. Now, having stayed in that 10 by 10 room with just one cot and also one chair and one table, and no AC, only fan, no TV, no newspaper, nothing, everything that I come across now seems to be a luxury for me. So if I don't have AC also, it's okay. If I have, I enjoy it. Don't have, it's okay. Like that, it transforms once. But again, I will not claim that I have reached there. It's a long process. I'm only probably in a primary stage in all these spiritual pursuits. And the last but not the least is Karma Yoga. What a spiritual person does, all the actions that he does, he actually has an attitude of offering that to Ishvara, to God. This is what in Karma Yoga we call Ishwararpana Bhava. In fact, those of you who know, we do after every puja and karma we do that Kayena Vacha Manasendriyarva. If you know that mantra, in the end we say that all that I am doing, I am actually offering to you, unto you, O Lord. This is what we say. And it is not, Karma Yoga doesn't stop there. When we are doing these actions, we have an expectation that we will get some result. But the expectation, the result may not be as per your expectations. So the attitude you have to have is a prasada bhava. Whatever you get, you accept it as what is Ishvara has given you. Accept it happily. I mean, for example, when we go to a temple, we may go with a lot of expectation. Oh, this temple, oh, we will get this big laddu. Or, in Tirupati, you go, big laddus are there and all. But do we not, with a lot of reverence, accept whatever prasada we get and come away? That same attitude for all our actions we will have to have. And so these are the 8 steps, which are involved in spiritualism. We have to start practicing them, and after some measure, we can graduate to the next level. In fact, when you get into Vedanta, you cannot just get into Vedanta like that. There is a preliminary text called Tattva Bodha, which tells you what are the qualifications required for a person who is in the spiritual pursuit. So you first of all evaluate yourself against those qualifications. They are called Sadhana Chatushtaya Sampatti. So first that Sadhana Chatushtaya Sampatti, you evaluate yourself, whether you are fit enough to in this pursuit. Otherwise, develop those Sadhana Chatushtaya, that the 6 qualities which they talk about, and then you can set on to this spiritual pursuit. And these are all, again, as I told you, these are preliminary steps. There's a huge, there's a very long journey, in the spiritual pursuit is. And this is what Krishna talks about in the 13th chapter: Amanitvam, Madambitvam, Ahimsa, Kshanti, Arjavam, Acharyopasanam, Shaucham. All these things, then Styrium, Atma Vinigraha, all these things. He talks about 20 disciplines which a spiritual person should follow. So that is the place where we can get what all other things that we need to follow. And when you follow all these things, the end goal, as I said, is moksha. And in the 2nd chapter, he beautifully describes what is this moksha. Atmani eva atmana tushtaha. You are happy with your own self. You don't need anything else to be happy. And that happiness with own self is what will be the enduring happiness which we are all seeking. And this, as I told you, is all there in this text, Tattva Bodha, but more about it later sometime. Hari Om. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.